The number one biggest mistake that I see a lot of real estate photographers make is that they'll spend way too much money on unnecessary gear, which then prevents them from spending the right amount of money on the right gear that would actually make their jobs a lot easier. There is a balance to this, and so what I want to do in this video is go through some of the gear and apps that really will get you the most bang for your buck doing professional real estate photography. A key to this is that when you spend the right amount of money on the proper tools and you're not wasting your money on this, then you have a budget that then can provide for backup gear, which is a must doing professional photography. It'll also then provide you a broader marketing budget so you can go get more clients, and also then you can buy more accessories that really don't cost that much but are so crucial, like different lights, different modifiers, different stands, backup batteries, a whole lot of other things, and also then the proper software that can make your job a lot easier, that you can get through jobs a lot quicker with the right type of gear, and you can do faster editing having the right type of software. But above all is to make sure that when you get this balance, you're not going to be sacrificing the quality of your work, that you'll still be getting really good high-end results, but you won't be breaking the bank to do it because you'll have a well-balanced budget with the right amount of gear, with the right tools to do the job right. So what I'd like to do is start with some of the simpler stuff, some of the simpler items that you might also not think about where you could save a lot of money when it comes to then your expenses for doing real estate photography. We'll start out simple, we'll work our way up from there. First though, before getting onto that, just real quick, I did want to mention that if you are interested in learning more about real estate photography, I do provide a variety of online courses to learn interior photography, expert editing, exterior photography, videography for real estate, business and marketing for real estate photography, and I also have written best-selling books on real estate photography as well. Now I have links to all that material down in the description of this video, but I've also included some links down in the description to some of my free tutorials that talk about some of this gear, some of the reviews of the gear that I'm going to be mentioning in this video, and also then other pertinent information to help you along. So anyways, without further ado, let's start from the bottom and work our way up to the top. The first item, which is so often overlooked, we think about cameras and lenses, and I'm going to get to that here in just a second. But the first thing to really consider, which can really add up over time and waste a lot of money, is the applications that you're using, the software apps that you use. There's a lot of plugins that are out there from DxO, from Topaz and whatnot, that are really good at what they do, but they're usually unnecessary costs. So when you're thinking about plugins and also these other extension programs that would just be going on to something like Photoshop or Lightroom Classic, you might want to think again, because you can just do those same things in those programs, and once you do, you can make actions and presets to take care of those same things. This isn't bagging on DxO or Topaz, just saying that if you want to keep your budget in check, for doing real estate photography, those things really aren't necessary. But when it comes to the main software, there's a few players out there. Now, we're all familiar with Adobe and Photoshop, Lightroom Classic. There's also Affinity, there's also Luminar Neo. The Adobe plan is one that I do prefer to have. For one thing, you can get a photography plan with Lightroom Classic and Photoshop for about $10 a month US. Now, nowadays, that's somewhat harder to find. They do hide that sometimes in their web pages. I'll have a link to it, but even then, sometimes it won't show up. It's a very iffy thing. That's because the $10 plan by Adobe comes with 20 gigabytes. They're really trying to push their 1 terabyte storage plan. I don't use Adobe for any of my storage, so I don't need that. I just need to use their software. But even if you were to pay $20 a month for Lightroom Classic and Photoshop, that really is a pretty good deal compared to some of the other programs, but also considering that this is one of those things that you should be spending your money on. This is something where you don't want to waste a lot of money on add-ons and other external programs, but having an Adobe suite of just Lightroom Classic and Photoshop, you can get a very efficient workflow with very, very consistent results. And if you do want to get that $10 plan, you can't find it, I'm going to leave a phone number down below where you can also call Adobe's sales. Guarantee you, you call and you ask for the $10 a month photography plan that includes Lightroom Classic and Photoshop with the 20 gigabytes of storage, they'll sell it to you and you'll get that. But let's take a look at Luminar Neo and Affinity, because those programs also provide somewhat similar features that we would use in real estate photography, which some of the big ones are the blending modes. For instance, luminosity blending mode when we're doing Flambient, and when we're doing window pulls, you'd be able to use something in darken mode. Well, those programs do have those features, but you're really not going to get the same thing as you're getting out of Adobe Photoshop, because when you take a look at Luminar Neo, if it's not on sale, it's going to cost you $420 a year on their subscription to get their free updates. Now, Affinity is only $70 for a one-time payment, but Affinity Photo is really more of a hobbyist program. Hey, it's great if that's what you're doing, but if you're wanting to do professional real estate photography, you need to spend your money on something that's going to save you time, and thus it pays for itself and makes you more money in the long run as well. And there is also the possibility of using free software like Gimp, which is kind of the free open source alternative to using Photoshop. And along with that, to use the Lightroom Classic replacement, it would be your free OEM software that comes from your camera manufacturer. Like with Nikon, they have an NX Studio, Canon, it's DPP. So I have a link to a video that I did called Free Flambient, where you could use these programs and not pay for software at all. But the amount of time that it takes you to do that, it's probably not worth it. If you're wanting to dip your toe in the water and just try out real estate photography before getting into a business, you could try that, save yourself some money now, but I really highly recommend, even if you have to pay $20 a month for the Adobe photography plan, it would be worth it to have an ongoing subscription to Lightroom Classic and Photoshop. Now let's get into some of the physical gear and where you can really save money. And this is something I do a lot. I don't buy a lot of new gear. In fact, I buy a lot of used gear, but not just through a marketplace. There's two websites that dominate the used industry, and that's KEH.com and MPB.com. These sites, I have no affiliation with them, by the way. I'm not making any money by mentioning them at all. These are just well known as being the top-notch sites because they usually provide a 6-month warranty on all the items that you buy. I mean, how could you go wrong? Something, you buy it, you try it, you don't like it. They also have usually a 21-day, I think, no questions asked policy if you don't even like it. But if something breaks, you got 6 months. So pretty good warranty period considering that it's used gear. In fact, the camera bodies that I use for my still work when I'm doing the real estate photography, interior and exterior still photos, those right now are Nikon Z5s. Now those are bargain cameras. They're full frame 24 megapixel, good cameras. But the thing is, you can buy them for just about $800 on KEH or MPB. Now that's a big discount, almost $600 discount compared to the new not on sale price of a Z5. But even when it's on sale, it's still a couple $100 less. So when you're taking a look at buying two bodies, because you're going to have your primary and backup body, even if you save $200, that's a $400 savings just by buying them used. And you really can't go wrong if you buy it through a trusted source like KEH or MPB. And along those lines, if you did want to buy something new, don't buy something that just came out. The new released cameras really aren't going to give you any benefit. If you have a mirrorless camera that was made in just the last few years, it's as good as any mirrorless camera that is coming out right now or next year when it comes to doing real estate photography. Now, I said mirrorless because DSLRs, yes, you can use them, and I used them for many years before mirrorless cameras and even for a while after mirrorless was released. While you can still do that, there are advantages to using mirrorless cameras, something I show throughout my courses and books, to be able to have that live view, to see how you're measuring white balance, to see how you're measuring exposure, so that real-time feedback can really reduce the amount of time. But the quality, you really don't need to. I mean, this is something when it comes to buying a new camera for real estate photography, 24 megapixels is more than enough, and you don't have to have some high burst count. We're not doing sports photography, so you just need everything in manual settings anyways. So a very simple camera, like the Nikon Z5, that's all you really need. Now, every camera nowadays, I don't care if it's Nikon, Sony, Canon, Fuji, whatever, it doesn't matter. All these cameras are basically the same. There is no big indistinguishable difference between any camera brand these days. Those days are gone. They all share similar designs. They'll compete with each other. So it's really a matter of what you feel comfortable with when it comes to the brand. But the biggest thing is, don't exceed 24 megapixels, don't buy something with all the bells and whistles, and don't buy it when it first comes out. When the Nikon Z5 came out, you couldn't get it for less than 1,400 bucks. Nowadays, you could buy a brand new one for right about 1,000 bucks, and of course, then used on MPB and KEH. And they won't hit these new cameras that come out every year. Don't hit the used market for a while. Another reason too why to just wait it out a little bit. You don't need all the bells and whistles. You need to have a camera that can do the job for you and also keep money in your pocket. The next thing are the lenses that you would choose, and we all know this can sometimes cost more than a camera body. Two things to consider here that can really save you money. One, you don't have to have an OEM lens. You don't have to have a Nikon lens on a Nikon camera. I use, in fact, there's one mounted on this one, I use Tachyna for a lot of stuff that I do. So the Tachyna 16-28 lens, it's an f2.8 lens. That thing really rocks. I mean, it really is comparable to the 14-24 that would also be provided by Nikon. Almost the exact same test results, but it's a fraction of the price. So don't be afraid to try Sigma, Tamron, or Tachyna. The thing is, you can buy any of these lenses brand new, you can put them on a camera, you can do your own testing at home. If you're not satisfied with it, send it back. Every place that sells them new, B&H, Autorama, doesn't matter. You're not happy with it after 30 days, they don't even ask questions, just send it back. So don't be pulled into the reviews and all these charts and graphs that show that this is going to be the best lens in this case or that case. Real estate photography, we're not shooting fast glass anyways, which brings up the next point is, should you be buying an f2.8 lens anyways? Those lenses are very expensive, especially the OEM lenses, compared to buying an f4 lens. For instance, the Nikon Z 14-24 f2.8 for the Z-mount camera, that's about $2,100 even when it's on sale. But when you take a look at the Nikon Z 14-30, that's the f4 lens, it's $1,000 cheaper. It's only $1,100 on sale. Right there, that saves you $1,000. And the thing is, that's probably a good enough lens for what you'd need for real estate photography. It's a really good lens. Is the f2.8 better? Absolutely, it's a better lens. But when you're doing real estate photography, I'd really bet that you can't tell the difference. Most of the time, you're going to be using f8. You aren't going to need to go down to f2.8 to begin with. And for most of what you'll be shooting, you'd be surprised. Here's a great example. If you like the photography that I've done, if you've never seen it before, you can go to my website, nathancoolphoto.com. And if you like that, well, that's done with mostly this Tachyna here, the 16-28 f2.8 lens, which is just like a $600 lens. It's really not that much. And most of my photography was done either on Nikon D610s when I was using DSLRs, or they've been using Nikon Z5s. Goes to show you that you really don't have to have a super expensive camera, and you also don't have to have super expensive lenses. So the f4 is definitely an option. Next thing is talking about geared heads and the tripods they'll go on. It used to be that geared heads were very expensive, so a lot of photographers would go the less expensive route and get a ball head. A geared head though will save you a ton of time. It's highly recommended. There's no reason you should be using a ball head for real estate photography nowadays. There are some very, very cost-effective alternatives. I've got a complete review video on 3 of them with 2 of my recommendations for it, and I've got a link to that down in the description of this video. The other thing is the tripod that it goes on. Tripods can be very expensive if you go to some of the higher brand manufacturers. You don't need to, but you don't want to get just a cheap travel tripod. You don't want to get something that says lightweight aluminum either. Those things are just not stable. You want to get a good thick carbon fiber tripod. Here's one. You can see it's not even $300. It's one that I recommend. Link to that also in the description of this video. Those things are beasts. They're very steady. The steadier you can keep your camera using a geared head and a really good tripod, the less time you're going to futz around in post. Also less time that you're going to futz around on site trying to frame up your shots. So don't cheap out on either one, but you don't have to break the bank. There are very I shouldn't say cheap, but very low cost, but yet highly effective alternatives for both geared heads and tripods. And the next thing is one that I see too many photographers skimp out on, because after buying the latest and greatest, most expensive camera out there with its compatible lens, they don't have enough money left over for simple stuff like lights, triggers, and light stands. I get a common question all the time. Someone will come to me and they'll say, hey, I've got this camera, and whatever it is, different model, doesn't matter. It could be a Nikon Z7, Z8, whatever. But they say, can I just use a speed light? Or can I get by with just an 8200? And I'm just shaking my head. Because it's like, okay, you spent an extra $2,000 on this camera that you didn't need to do, and you don't want to spend maybe $300 on another light. That just doesn't make sense. For that extra $2,000 that you would spend, you could have 5, 6 lights, and you don't need that many, you just need a few. So save your money on the cameras and lenses, and then don't cheap out when it comes to the lights. There's a lot of great lights that you can use. You know that I use the Godox line, it's what I recommend, and I've got review videos on a slew of them on my YouTube channel, so I'll have links to those also down in the description of this video. Another one that it's more of a rumor that you need this. I see a lot of photographers say, why aren't you using a CPL? Why am I not using a polarizer? Why am I not using this polarizer filter? Because that'll really help cut the glare. Well, it's just not necessary. It's just another piece of glass that I gotta put on the front of my lens, and when you're talking about the really good f2.8 glass, when you're going really wide, it's gonna have a bulbous front element. It's gonna be difficult to get a good filter on there anyways. But that's not the reason. The reason is because if you shoot and edit properly, you do not need a CPL, that polarizing filter, for doing real estate photography. So just cut that out. Doesn't matter if it's interior, exterior, you don't need a CPL. Take my word for it, you don't. Save your money. And the last thing that I do want to mention here are things that'll keep your camera safe. Do not skimp out when it comes to buying a really good camera case and camera bags to keep things like your tripods and that in. You can get really good Pelican cases that are a few $100s, but when you're putting a bunch of gear in there, when you're putting thousands and thousands of dollars worth of gear in there, you are protecting it. I can't tell you how many times I have throughout the years dropped my case, banged it into walls or something otherwise, and never worried about it. So you can see, even keeping your camera safe, these things are going to help you get a longer career, because you're not gonna have to keep buying new gear. You're not gonna be damaging your gear, but also you're gonna be keeping things in check. By having more money in your pocket, less money just in gear that you don't need, that's how you can move forward, because you can start making your work go a lot faster. Put your money into the things that will help your work succeed, not just in quality, but also in speed, and that will give you the balance then to go forward with any career in professional photography.